Nothing will stand in our way.
I find your lack of faith disturbing.
I will finish what you started.
Who are you?
I'm no one. There are stories about what happened.
It's true. All of it.
The Force. It's calling to you.
May the Force be with us.
My nerd world.
Just let it in.
Ojaba. Why does she get a blaster and I don't? Ojaba.
All right, so you can thank my wife, Melinda, for episode number 91 of the My Nerd World Star Wars podcast. And I'll explain. I'm your host, John Justice, back for another 45 minutes of talking about that galaxy far, far away, a long time ago. So listen, I've got a whole list here. I got a huge list of things Star Wars related to talk about. I've actually been sitting on it for about a week now. We've got a ton of toy leaks. And with these toy leaks, we've been given what I got from MakingStarWars.net. These are Target, these are Walmart spoilers. These are items you're going to find on toy packaging that do lend themselves to information that perhaps that we didn't have from the Last Jedi. And so apparently in Panama, some retailer put out a whole bunch of Last Jedi toys. And so we'll talk a bit about that. We've got a new, the ski speeder, the Resistance ski speeder. This is the craft that you see in the trailer that is dragging and kicking up the red minerals from the white surface of Crate. We know it's called Crate. From the trailer for The Last Jedi. We've got action figures, we've got books, we've got a bruised and a Rey with a cut arm. We've got a better image of Kylo's silencer from the movie that looks amazing. We've talked about this before. We have a ton to cover. I found a new podcast, new Star Wars podcast, Who Talks First, that I'm really enjoying. They've laid out some really interesting theories. So we're basically going to just run through my list and see how far we get talking Star Wars this week. But let's talk a little bit about the podcast and why you can thank my wife, Melinda, for the podcast today. So as I mentioned in one of the updates prior to episode 90, there is another project that I'm working on that I'm not ready to go and share with the world yet. My wife's the only one. Well, my wife and my boys, they're the only ones that know that I'm working on this project. And I'm really excited about it, and it is coming along better than I had expected. It's way out of my comfort zone for something that I would do. And because of that, it's a little bit difficult. It actually is a labor of love for me to do it, because it's just something that I don't normally enjoy doing, and so it's taking me a bit of discipline to get this done. So that's why I've been sporadic in all my podcasts, apart from my NASCAR podcast, because they take place every week. So, and I want to make sure that when I sit down to do the podcast, I really want to sit down and do the podcast. And so today was one of those days. I sat down, I worked on my project for about 40 minutes, and that was about what I wanted to do for the day. It was a little earlier in the day, and for some reason, everybody was just kind of ho-hum. It's the middle of the week, and I wasn't really in a podcasting mood. And I actually went and talked to Melinda about that. I was kind of just walking around the house, and nobody really felt like doing anything. And I'd already played some video games, and I said, yeah, I don't really feel like podcasting. And Melinda said, well, don't. If you don't want to podcast, don't podcast. And I said, yeah, I know. I said, I feel like I probably should, though. I've got time to do it. And she goes, which one were you going to podcast? And I said, well, I was either going to do my Depeche Mode or I was going to do Star Wars. And I said, that's all I said. I said I was going to do Star Wars. And she goes, well, what is there new to talk about? And I go, oh my gosh, there's tons to talk about. There's all kinds of toys that have been leaked and details on the packaging. I think I've figured out the entire framework of the movie. And she just kind of looked at me like, really? And I go, yeah. And so in the middle of me talking to her about what I could talk about, I was instantly inspired to come and do the podcast. So that's why you're getting an episode number 91, because I very little, it's like Carrie Fisher says in that behind the scenes video for The Last Jedi at the very, very end. It's about family. There's just, and I know I've said it, I keep saying it, there's just something so special about Star Wars and something so unique about what George Lucas, created. And there are times when you don't feel like getting into it, but it doesn't take much for me to go, yeah, now I want to talk about Star Wars. And so here we are. So let's start here. I remember, and I'm going to put there's a big, huge spoiler warning on the podcast today. I don't have, and I'll explain when I do, I don't have any inside knowledge of what I'm about to lay out. What I'm going to talk about on the show today is my pure speculation, my deducing of the movie based off of what I know and past history. Again, those Target, Walmart spoilers that I talked about. There's a couple of reports that I'm gonna throw in here of things that we know or we believe are going to happen, but none of this is really concrete apart from the things that have already been put out into the public, whether it is, again, the toys, the behind the scenes, or the trailer. So if you don't want any idea, then skip the podcast. But if you're okay with getting information that you can kind of glean from trailers, and I believe we're going to get a trailer here in the next few weeks. We'll talk about this in a bit, but I do believe we'll get a trailer here in the next few weeks. So that'll be sort of the gist of the podcast. I have no concrete information about this apart from just piecing together what I know and taking past history into account. All that being said, I think I have the basic framework of how The Last Jedi is going to play out. I don't know specifics, certainly not the things that everybody wants to know. What's going to happen with Luke? What's Rey's challenge going to be? Right? There's got to be a conflict. I mean, having mommy, daddy gone isn't, and they're not coming back from what we've been told from Maz Kanata and The Force Awakens. So there's got to be a conflict there. So, I mean, it has to be about parents or parentage in some way, shape, or form, right? Obviously, there's got to be a conflict with Luke. We've been told time and time again from the actors and from Rian Johnson, the director, that this movie is every character is going to be challenged in one way, shape, or form. Okay, so I do believe that I've pieced together the basic framework of the movie, minus what these challenges, apart from my speculation, are going to be. So, Rian Johnson has said that well, first off, we know that The Last Jedi is going to pick up right where The Force Awakens left off. He wanted to answer what gets said between Luke and Rey. You see it in the behind the scenes video. She's handing him the lightsaber. I wonder if they don't do something different with this movie, in that we have, and again, pure speculation, but what if, how we had the sort of cold open for Rogue One, where you had a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, and then you had, the planet pop up, and then you see Krennic's ship fly into screen, and it's only after that prologue do we get the goofy Rogue One without any Star Wars attached to it intro. I wonder, and now that I describe it, I can't imagine them copying Rogue One, but there's a lot of speculation that there needs to be some kind of time jump in here. There's got to be some sort of progression to get from Rey meeting Luke to Rey getting trained, which we'll get into because she is getting trained. And this is something that I haven't heard a lot of people talk about. And we know this for a fact. And even apart from what you've seen in the trailer, we'll get to this. But I wonder if we don't maybe open immediately before we get the Star Wars logo on the crawl. We get a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. What if we get one of those establishing shots like we got in the trailer? The beginning of the trailer where you hear Luke saying, "Breathe, just breathe," right? And then you see, the helicopter shot over the mountains of Octu or H-To, however I've heard it pronounced multiple ways. And then we get the opening between Luke and Rey, and then maybe a quick introduction to what happened with Kylo. Maybe Kylo and General Hux getting off the planet, heading towards Snoke on his command Star Destroyer, which we know exists from the Legos that have been leaked, leading up to a quick close to the prologue, kind of like we got in Rogue One, and then we get the logo and the crawl. And the opening from the logo and the crawl ends up being the first shot in the trailer where you think you're seeing a starfield, but what you're really seeing are the rocks come into view, and then Rey comes down and she's breathing heavy, as if we've had a bit of a time jump, and that's the first thing we end up seeing. Pure speculation. Once I said that it would kind of compare to Rogue One, I can't imagine them doing that again, but it certainly would be interesting, and I would be fine with it. Okay, so here's what I think the basic framework of the movie is going to be. You get, regardless of how it plays out, you're going to get an opening with Rey and with Luke. Okay? For certain. We know that's going to happen. You know, some type of introduction for them. What are their first thoughts? We're going to find out the state, Luke's mental state, and you'll hear about this in the packaging, in the packaging paragraph that's on Rey's action figure. But Luke isn't what Rey thought that he was going to be, okay? I imagine then, shortly after that, we're going to get, or maybe we start with, prior to Rey and Luke, because there's a bit of time between the end when Starkiller Base has exploded, when we know that General Hux and Kylo Ren got off of Starkiller. Maybe it opens with the Starfield and their ship heading towards Snoke before we jump to Rey and Luke and their meeting and what they say. But we know that's going to have to take place in the beginning at some point in time. We're going to see Luke and Rey. We're going to see Kylo Ren and General Hux probably meet back up with Snoke to establish they got off the planet. This is where they are right now. Then we're going to need to see what's the current status of Finn. We know in the trailer, Finn is in what looks like a medical pod. We also know from the behind the scenes and what John Boyega has said this week, talking about his adventure that he goes on with Rose, Kelly Marie Tran, the new character, that he gets out of that. And in the trailer, the final shot that we see are what we know now are resistance bombers and X-Wings and A-Wings being attacked by the First Order. I believe that is the escape off of Dakar, where the Rebel base is. So we're going to go Luke and Rey, Kylo, Snoke. We're going to get an update on where Finn is. We're going to get an update on Poe. We'll probably get introduced. We'll see Leia. We'll probably get introduced to Rose. And then immediately following that, the First Order is going to launch an attack on Dakar, driving the Resistance off of Dakar and out into space, which would be very reminiscent of The Empire Strikes Back. Okay. And then I think you're going to get something akin to what we had also in The Empire Strikes Back, but also a bit of what you saw in The Empire Strikes Back. You're going to get Rey training with Luke. You're going to get the Resistance figuring out what their next move is. And this is kind of what we saw when it comes to the Rebels and what they ended up doing. Now, the Rebels went largely absent in the beginning of the film, so probably more akin to, say, Return of the Jedi, where you had the Rebel fleets out in space trying to figure out what their next move is. Okay, so you have the Resistance, regrouping while Rey's training is going on. We also know that at some point, Finn, BB-8, and Rose take off an adventure. There's a shuttle, there's a Lego shuttle that shows them, they're both with a Lego shuttle. We know they go to this casino planet, which we saw in the behind the scenes, and we know most likely at that casino planet, they're trying to get information of some sort. They're going to come across Benicio del Toro's character, DJ, and they're going to hook up with him. I believe that they're on a mission, whatever it is, to find out perhaps what the First Order's next move is. We also know that they end up infiltrating the First Order. We saw this in the behind-the-scenes trailer. You saw Finn and Rose in First Order gear. So I think they go to Canto Bight, stuff goes down at Canto Bight. We have the introduction of DJ, who I believe means turn the tables, so I think he's going to be good and bad. But I think it's through him that they're able to infiltrate the First Order to try to figure out what their next game plan is. And all the while, Luke is training with Rey. We also know, or we believe, based off of some of the spy reports, that at some point, Kylo Ren is going to show up with the Knights of Ren or somebody. I don't think it's going to be the Praetorian Guards that we've seen, and we'll talk about. These are the Red Guards that we showed in their... you can see a picture of them in last week's, or episode 90 a few weeks ago, the podcast. But we've seen the action figures and actually the production photos of these guys already. We know that eventually, or we believe eventually, they go to Ahch-To. And there's a confrontation between Kylo Ren, whatever bad dudes he brings, and Luke and Rey. And Rey gets injured because in some of the production work and in some of the action figures, she's got a bruise over the left side of her face and she's got a cut on her arm. And I think it's at this moment that, depending on what happens, Rey, a lot like Luke, ends up realizing that her friends are in trouble, and she goes to meet up with the Resistance, who I believe then end up on Crate. Crate is the planet with the red minerals that we saw in the trailer. So you wonder if, again, much like The Empire Strikes Back, if Finn and Rose get away from the First Order, but end up being tracked. So the First Order finds out that they're on Crate, and that's where the final battle of the film takes place. And Rey, at some point, leaves Ahch-To to go join and save her friends, maybe before her training is done. Now, my other evidence to this goes back to something that I was completely wrong in theorizing when I saw the Force Awakens trailers. I was convinced in the Force Awakens trailers that they were not showing us everything. I was convinced in those trailers that they were holding back a location, a planet, an event, a something or other. And they never did that. And they didn't do it in Rogue One either. In the trailers, so far, in sort of our new Star Wars universe, the trailers have, and in the behind-the-scenes videos, the trailers have kind of shown us every single location we're going to see. So we're going to see Dakar, we're going to see some places in space, probably going to spend a lot of time on some ships. We know that some ships get attacked. We see that in the trailer, and I think that's going to be part of the opening of them trying to get off of Dakar, the Resistance base at the beginning of the film. We know there's a massive Star Destroyer that's in the Legos. We believe that's where Snoke is at. There's also been some reports of an even larger Star Destroyer that we haven't seen yet. We know there's a new casino planet, Canto Bight, and we know that at some point they end up on Crate. Apart from that, I think that's where we're heading. And I think that's the basic framework of the movie. And if you look at the Force Awakens trailers, they ended up showing us some pieces of those puzzles. They ended up showing pretty much every single place that you're going to end up going. Now, obviously, a ton's going to happen in between, but it's pretty clear at the moment that we're getting something different. That casino planet, if you saw in the behind-the-scenes video, it looks drastically different. We're getting new species. Whatever happens on Ahch-To with Rey and Luke, we already know based off of what we've seen, it's going to be different. If you haven't gotten up to speed on the Porgs yet, you're missing out. So the Porgs, and they actually put an article up on StarWars.com. You can see these little penguin-looking dudes in the behind-the-scenes video. In the action figure for Chewbacca, he comes with the Porg. There's going to be a kid's book that comes out. It's Chewbacca and the Porgs. There's some speculation that they like to eat metal and that they may at some point be munching on the Millennium Falcon, to which Luke has to come and keep Chewie from hurting them and telling them to get off of it. They might be Force sensitive, but they are, within the fan culture, because I follow all of this, I can tell you they are incredibly popular. These Porgs are. And there's also a lot of speculation. It's kind of gone beyond speculation now, but that Rey goes through some type of trial and battles some type of sea monster on Ahch-To at the beginning of the film. Lawrence Kasdan, who wrote Empire Strikes Back and co-wrote The Force Awakens with J.J. Abrams, he said that that Rian Johnson's script was weird, right? He said it was weird. But, that's going to be the perspective of the individual and how they're using the word weird. I think we're getting Star Wars. A lot of us were put off, and I was the first time I saw it. I know when I watched The Force Awakens, the Rathtar scene kind of threw me for a loop. Every scene in that movie, to me, is very relevant, and the Rathtar scene just kind of seemed like, oh, we're throwing in a random monster. But I had to kind of stop myself and not be such a snob and go, that's Star Wars. What was the Rancor? I mean, go back to the prequels. I mean, and all the monster. I mean, the whole, Attack of the Clones scene in episode 2. It's part of what makes Star Wars Star Wars. These porgs and this monster. We know that there's these horse-like creatures called Fathiers that are going to be on Canto Bight. They're like race horses. And there's been some artwork, this official artwork has been released showing like a jockey on one of these Fathiers. They look really cool. They've got these, they almost look, Sam from our weekly show said they look like, the head looks like the cross between a Yoda head and a horse. They're really cool looking. I think Rian Johnson has done something new. Everybody's saying it's fresh and it's new, but I can't help but wonder if it's fresh and new because it's going to be so unlike The Force Awakens. There are things that are Star Wars, but I think that we're so used to seeing the original trilogy that we don't consider the big asteroid worm from The Empire Strikes Back and kind of how ridiculous and silly that is, right? We don't consider the Sarlacc pit to be weird as adults because we grew up with it. I think what Rian Johnson is giving us something fresh and new, but I think he's giving us something that's very grounded in the reality of Star Wars. And they keep talking about spiritual. I don't know yet what they are going to do to turn this movie on its head, and certainly I've done my fair share of speculating on the podcasts and listening to an interview today with Mark Hamill about how he didn't agree with what Rian Johnson was doing with his character. But at the same time, after spending time with it and realizing this was the right thing to do with his character. So let's go here for just a minute. Let's talk a bit about characters and character arcs and where this all needs to go and some of the speculation that I've heard. And it's going to sound a little bit random. It's going to be kind of all over the place, but let's just deal with it for a moment. I do think we are going to be heading into this middle ground of Jedi. If you asked me what I think The Last Jedi means, what I think that Luke finds out, I think it's pretty clear based off the fandom and at least what we've been told that we are going to end up looking at the prequel trilogy in a much, much different way than we do now based off of what we know. A lot of us have come to the conclusion, and it's really, really interesting when you go back and watch the prequels now, that the Jedi were all wrong. And I was having a conversation with, I was doing Bible studies with my boys, and we were, so, and I can't remember exactly where we were, how I brought this into the conversation, but I was doing a Bible story with my boys, and I was talking about expressing emotion and showing emotion, and keeping things in check, and, being grounded. There was a lesson about okay to cry, let your emotions out, just don't let them get too out of hand. And I'm really, really just getting to the basics on this without getting into a Bible lesson, because my father's probably listening to this going, what in the world are you talking about? But let me get to my point. My point is this. Okay, when we talk about balance, this is the thing that always did. This drove me nuts when the prequels came out. And I know it was part of what George was saying, but I think it's part of what we're going to get back to in The Last Jedi. But the teaser poster for Attack of the Clones was, a Jedi shall not know anger, nor hate, nor love. Give me a break. Give me a break. It's almost as if Anakin had it right in Attack of the Clones. When you go back and watch Attack of the Clones with this mentality, and you can go back to The Phantom Menace and do the same thing, but when you go into this idea that the Jedi had it wrong, almost like monks, almost like nuns, it's a part of who we are. To suppress the love element. It's a bit unnatural. You're pushing down something that by our very nature we gravitate towards, that we need as people, even in a galaxy far, far away. And, Anakin's interpretation of love, attachment is forbidden, right? But, I see this as unconditional love. So the Jedi are required to love. Well, that wasn't what he was being taught. That's what he was trying to justify to himself because he was in love with Padme. And why wouldn't he be? She's hot. Okay, so it's almost as if Anakin had it right. But unfortunately, Palpatine, Sidious was the one who ended up grabbing him instead of the good side grabbing him and tapped into that thing that he was wavering from. But I think it goes back to the Jedi and their wrong teachings. I mean, on top of the fact that the Jedi should have never made an army. They should have never tried to go and save the Republic. I think that Luke finds out that the Jedi had it all wrong. And that perhaps being a Jedi was really more akin to, say, the mindset of a Sith, where only two there are, a master and an apprentice. You don't make an army of Jedi. Certainly not beholden to this code that is completely unnatural. That you go into Revenge of the Sith and the speech with then Palpatine. If one wants to embrace all of the Force, one has to learn all of its aspects, not just a dogmatic view of the Jedi. You have to know all of it, but it's about balancing all of that out. Getting back to the religious part of it, and I won't turn this into a religious, discussion, but be that as it may, sin is a part of our lives. You work as hard as you can to avoid that, but that's the process. You need to try to work to avoid it, but also realize that by our nature, we are sinful individuals. A line from Animal House that even as a kid resonated with me, and it was Donald Sutherland teaching in front of the class, and he makes it was just a really quick comment when he's taught. You see Karen Allen in the audience, and I think they're having an affair, but he talks about being bad is more fun than being good. And Palpatine just tapped into that with Anakin. So getting back to The Last Jedi, I think that when Rey meets Luke, she's going to think there's this legend here before me, and he's going to be all about teaching me for a Jedi, and based off of partly what happened with Luke, I think he fails. He tries to create this Jedi Academy, and it blows up in his face when he learns the truth, and potentially the reason why he blows up in his face is that maybe he was teaching Kylo Ren, who was being influenced by Snoke at the time, and they both realized together that what they were doing was wrong, that Luke shouldn't have been training a new crop of Jedi. This was not the way that it was supposed to be. It's not how the Jedi were supposed to be. It was a very misguided view and a twisted view of what a Jedi is supposed to be, and it should be more about this balance. You can't just suppress it and keep it down. It's part of who we are. And that perhaps Kylo Ren wiped it out because he knew that. He felt betrayed and wiped it out, and he knew it, and that's why Luke went off into hiding. So when we get back to story arcs, I heard today on a podcast, somebody made a great point, and that was wondering about Luke, and it's the same podcast. It was Rebel Force Radio, and they were talking about this comment from Mark Hamill about how his character takes a weird turn, and it's not what you expect. So if it's not what we expect, then what would we expect? Well, what we would expect is that we saw Luke's transformation in the original trilogy, and by the time you get to Return of the Jedi, he is very much a different individual. If you watch them all back to back, if you didn't have the years go by between the films, it's a little bit harder to see because you see it happen quickly. But when you have the distance on the movies, when you go from A New Hope to Return of the Jedi, or to The Empire Strikes Back to Return of the Jedi, Luke's got an arc. He's got a very big arc. He's a much, much different individual by the time you get to Return of the Jedi. And especially when you see that, and it's showcased especially and it brings me new appreciation for Jabba's palace in Return of the Jedi. Return of the Jedi is arguably my least favorite of all the films. It has moments in it that I love, but there's pockets of it that I just, don't care for as much. The whole opening scene on Tatooine it's cool, but it's just not my favorite by any stretch. I love it, but it's just not my favorite. But when Luke shows up on Tatooine, he's different, man. He's got the black robes on, he's got the hood up, he's trying to be in command control. Even then, he's not quite there yet, but he ends up winning the day, and by the time you get to the end of it, he is strong enough to not succumb to the Force. I am a Jedi, like my father before me. So he reaches in his mind, and for all intents and purposes, he reaches Jedi status. So if that's where you leave Luke, well, then where are we going to find Luke? Well, I think we're going to find Luke as a broken individual. Luke, had his arc. Where's the next place he can go? Well, probably down. Something happens. Something put him in exile on that planet. We know from one of the toy leaks, and we talked about it in episode 90, there's an X-Wing underneath the water on Octu for some reason. Did he put it there? Were the Porgs trying to eat it? But I think Luke is going to be very, very hesitant to train Rey because of what he learned. Or perhaps he was waiting for Rey. But when Rey gets to him, he is not what she expected that she was going to end up seeing. And so I think this is not going to be about his arc, obviously. We're going to get a Luke where he is, and then he's going to do what he needs to do to bring our new characters to where they need to be, and then he'll make his exit. At the same time, we need to see Rey's arc. And on the packaging for both the Black Series figure and for her action figure, it says Rey Jedi Training. Now, I know that may not come as a surprise to a lot of people. We see her wielding her sword and her laser sword, her lightsaber, and Luke standing there in the trailer. But the fact that the packaging says, for a couple different packagings, the fact that it says Jedi Training, to me, that speaks volumes. He is training her as a Jedi, but I think he's training her in the ways of the Jedi of old. I think he's training her in the ways that the Jedi should be, that she needs to find the balance between the dark and the light. I think Snoke knows it as well, because that's why Snoke was trying to keep Kylo teetering between the two. That's why Kylo was having such a difficult time, right? I feel it again, the pullness of the light. Grandfather, show me the dark side, and I will finish what you started. I think that Kylo Ren, while killing Han Solo, was very hesitant to do that. And one of the things that I really liked hearing these two girls talk on Who Talks First, the podcast, they're really, really into Kylo. And they're convinced that Kylo Ren and his arc is going to be the major focal point, and that we're almost seeing an Anakin in reverse, where he starts off on the dark side, but then he ends up shifting over to the light. And that if Kylo Ren doesn't end up coming to the light, it really makes Han Solo's sacrifice, doing that thing with my fingers, not even worth it. It makes it meaningless for him to have had his son kill him, because in the novelization, it says Han Solo forgives his son in that moment as he dies, and hopes that his son can forgive him too. So he accepts his fate, forgives his son. If Kylo Ren doesn't have some type of redemption arc, then it really doesn't make Han Solo's death worthwhile. It was kind of pointless. So I can't help but wonder if, and I'm not going to go so far as the Reylo theory is that Rey and Kylo end up hooking up romantically, and Rian Johnson has said there is no romantic story within the film. I think Rose and Finn are going to have a relationship, but nothing on par with Luke and Leia in The Empire Strikes Back. But I wonder if Kylo doesn't end up realizing the truth, seeing how strong Rey is, seeing the light in Rey, and Snoke ends up becoming the main target, right? They realize that if we're going to have balance, it's got to be between us and the universe. You can't have the dark without the light, but we've got to get rid of the main bad guy who doesn't see that and wants to see it all wiped out again. Almost as if everybody ends up figuring this out except for Snoke. Snoke's the one that doesn't end up figuring out that you're going to have balance. Because when you go and you look at the first 6 movies, bringing us to where The Force Awakens was, you can't help but go, well, what was the point of the first 6 if we've got a new enemy now, right? I mean, I know it's storytelling. There's always going to be an enemy. But you kind of go, they went through all that, and the First Order rose to prominence in the wake of the Empire, and they're copying them? Well, yeah, one can't help but wonder that you defeated the dark side to the point where you left a void there and a vacuum that had to be filled by something. Now, I don't know what the answer is to keep the balance, unless you just have 2 factions that are sitting out there. If you have a dark side and a light side that are out there and they're just there in existence, keeping everything in balance, right? But let's bring in the Mortis arc from the Clone Wars into the discussion, and that's exactly what we had. And again, if you haven't seen that, you need to go watch it right now. Stop the podcast, go watch the Mortis arc from the Clone Wars, and come back and listen to the rest of the podcast. But in that arc, Ahsoka, Obi-Wan, and Anakin end up on this Force planet, doing that thing with my fingers, and they discover this individual who was sort of the embodiment of balance, and he's got a son and a daughter. Daughter's on the light side, son is on the dark side, and there's tempting going on both sides. And the leader tries to get Anakin to stay with them because he knows how powerful he is. And it really does sort of upend this idea of what the Force is supposed to be. Like, you can't have one without the other. And so when you look at the new trilogy, it makes sense that the new trilogy is going to be about finding out that you can't completely void one without bringing in the other. You're gonna have something there to fill the void. If not, things are going to get thrown out of balance. They're going to get thrown out of whack. Or maybe it's my other theory that Anakin was never the chosen one at all. He was a manipulation of Palpatine to throw them off, and it turns out that he was never the chosen one. He just ended up being very strong in the Force, and Rey actually is the chosen one, and she's the one who's supposed to bring balance to the Force because the other one was fake. I'm not saying that I 100% believe that. All right, let's get into some of what this what this toy packaging had to say. There's some pretty interesting insight in here. So, the Praetorian Guards, these are those awesome red guards that we talked about. They look really cool. We know for a fact there's 3 or 4. We think there's 6. Pretty sure they're not the Knights of Ren. Don't know what happens to the Knights of Ren. I mean, they can't just disappear, right? All right, so Praetorian Guards. This is what's on back of the Praetorian Guards packaging. As the supreme leader of the First Order... Ooh, let me stop here. They did put out a picture, and I'm hesitant to put it in the notes for the podcast because Disney's been sending out cease and desist, and I'd hate to have them make me take it down, so I probably won't. They did put out a production photo of Snoke, and he's got pale, human-like skin. Is completely gross looking, looks real as all get out, has got this grainy skin neck that actually has, like, holes in it. Like, I had to have a hematoma removed from my side, and I had this big gaping hole in my side from where it was. It was really gross and disgusting. That's what Snoke's neck looks like. Like, he could take the keys to a Star Destroyer, and he could, like, hang them, like, right inside of his neck if he wanted to. It's really, really, really gross. And then he wears, like, this gold outfit. He's got, like, he's like, blinged out, right? It's really weird. All right, so as supreme leader of the First Order, Snoke stood atop an evil regime that mirrored many of the dark traditions of the Galactic Empire. As a striking example, Snoke was flanked by crimson-clad guardians, loyal protectors encased in ornate armor ready to defend the supreme leader from any threat. Okay? What I found interesting about that is mirroring many of the dark traditions of the Galactic Empire. I like that. These are very reminiscent of the Royal Guards, the Red Royal Guards that looked so awesome in Return of the Jedi that never saw any action. They were also in Revenge of the Sith. Yoda walks in at the end when he's dealing with Palpatine and just uses the Force and throws him against the wall. Awesome scene. But I like the fact that they addressed, even if it's just in the packaging, that here they addressed the fact that Snoke is mirroring the traditions of the Galactic Empire. For some reason, whatever his his origins are, whatever his background is. He's trying to make it look like the Galactic Empire. And so I was really happy to read that, because to me that makes sense, and I'm glad I see the explanation of why the First Order troopers look like old stormtroopers, why the ships look similar. I think that's cool. Kylo Ren. After a stinging defeat by the scavenger Rey, Kylo Ren refocuses his efforts on destroying the Resistance. Through his powers in the dark side, though his powers in the dark side have increased, Kylo still has much to prove to his shadowy mentor, Supreme Leader Snoke. I do agree with the Who Talks First podcast. I think there's going to be an arc to Kylo. I think there's a reason why when The Force Awakens was being promoted and the interviews with Adam Driver, he kept talking about, he's like, well, if you think you're doing right, then it's not like you're doing wrong. If you think what you're doing is just and right, it's right to you. And to me, by saying that is an indication that, well, if that's the case, if you can be told and learn that what you're doing is actually wrong, then you can turn back from the dark side. And look, it's not really all that unlike Darth Vader. Now, the only thing I will say, I'm running out of time. I got to get to Rey. The only thing that I will say is that if there is a redemption arc sort of in reverse of Anakin from the prequels, right? Anakin starts off kid, ends up getting corrupted, and then we end up where we are at the beginning of A New Hope with Darth Vader, and or at the end of Revenge of the Sith, and he's Darth Vader. If we get the inverse of that in The Last Jedi, it's a little bit weird, and this is just way, and this is way overthinking it, but the whole podcast is overthinking it. It does kind of mirror what happened in the original trilogy, except for Darth Vader was bad through the whole thing. So I can see the logic there. If you look at it from 9 movies, you see the arc, and it makes sense. Okay. All right. In the few minutes we have left, this is what it says at the on Rey's packaging. At long last, Rey has found Luke Skywalker, the last Jedi Master in the galaxy. Hoping to find a hero of legend, she must unlearn what she has learned as Skywalker challenges her expectations. But again, we do know for a fact that she is a Jedi in training. And I think I mentioned it in the last podcast, but if she's a Jedi in training, and this movie's called The Last Jedi, I'm not so sure that Luke makes it out alive. If he doesn't make it out alive, I'm convinced that we will see him as a Force ghost in Episode 9. He sure had plenty of time on Octu to figure that trick out, right? Thanks for checking out the podcast. If you've been waiting for it, I'm glad you did. Thanks, my wife, for inspiring me to sit down and yak about Star Wars for 45 minutes. That flew by quickly. TalkShowNerd@gmail.com. TalkShowNerd@gmail.com. You can find this at all your fine podcast locations, whether it's YouTube, Spreaker, Stitcher, iTunes, also on the Twin Cities News Talk Spreaker feed as well. And hopefully we'll have a new podcast. The next podcast might even be a trailer review if my theory is correct and it follows the same timeline as Rogue One and their promotion. We should get one here in a couple weeks. Until the next time we talk, may the Force be with you always.
My nerd